Hi class, this is Dr. Bell and I want to welcome you to week 4. I've entitled this week Escape from Freedom because one of the things we're going to be looking at this week is the question of free will. So it's important each week that we look back over the material that we've covered. In week 1, we looked at psychoanalytic therapy with Sigmund Freud. And then as we got to week 2, we began to talk about Adlerian and existential therapy. In week 3, we looked at person-centered therapy as well as Gestalt and transactional analysis. But today we're going to be looking at behavioral therapy as well as rational emotive therapy. I want to give you a little secret here that every student should know. It's critical that you take a look at the student learning objectives each week. This is, what are we trying to accomplish this week? So here are the objectives for this week. At the end of this week, I would like for you to be able to explain the history and the development of behaviorism. Secondly, I would like you to be able to discern the difference made by free will from the worldview. Free will is one of the key components that, in my estimation, offers the biggest challenge and the biggest problems to behavioral therapy, and I want you to understand what all that means. Third, I'd like you to be able to explain the difference between operant and classical conditioning in behavioral therapy. And then finally this week, I'd like you to be able to articulate the basic goals of the different cognitive-based therapies. So first, we'll be looking at what is behaviorism, that is, what is behavioral therapy. So here's the definition of behaviorism as presented in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Behaviorism is a school of psychology that takes the objective evidence of behavior, such as anything that can be considered a measured response to stimuli, and it takes this as the only concern of its research and the only basis of its theory without reference to conscious experience. Please especially look at that last phrase, without reference to conscious experience. I've provided for you a little chart here that I think will help you see the grounding or the philosophical basis of behaviorism. The philosophical roots here lie in a philosophy called materialism. It is also called physicalism and atomism. It kind of depends on which discipline you're looking at. In psychology, it's often called materialism. What that means is humans are only physical. We are not soul and body. We are only body. Secondly, because we don't have a soul, then we don't have free will. And Skinner presents this in his landmark book written in 1971 called Beyond Freedom and Dignity. In my estimation, this is the book that officially launched the postmodern age. Behaviorism talks a lot about stimulus and response, and this week you're going to learn a lot about operant conditioning and classical conditioning. What I want to do here is kind of give you a reenactment, a modern reenactment of the study of Pavlov's dogs. Basic idea is really quite simple. When Pavlov did his study, he discovered that dogs would start salivating when a bell rang because the dogs had been conditioned to understand that they would be fed at that time. So the bell ringing conditioned the dogs to salivate and get excited because they knew they were going to be fed. The other psychotherapy that we're going to be looking at in week 4 is called cognitive behavioral therapy, which is really a collection of several different kinds of therapy. You can read here Merriam-Webster's definition of cognitive behavioral therapy. What's going to be critical for you as you read through this chapter, as you remember that this is kind of a collection of therapies, also the names of these therapies, to make it more complicated, have somewhat evolved and changed through the years. What used to primarily be known as rational emotive therapy, RET, is now generally referred to as rational emotive behavioral therapies, REBT, and that's a version of cognitive behavioral therapy. CBT has that for all those acronyms. Albert Ellis is the primary mover and shaker in this area. I think it's important to see what was said about him in the publication Psychology Today. It said no individual, not even Freud himself, has had a greater impact on modern psychotherapy. Let me simplify, perhaps it's an oversimplification, Ellis's view on rational emotive therapy. These are kind of his ABCs. First, he has A, and A is the adversity. This is the problem that brings the counselee in to see the counselor. It's whatever trauma the counselee has experienced. And then, secondly, is the belief about that trauma. How does the counselee frame that particular event, that particular adversity? And then thirdly is the consequences. And the consequences are the damage that has been done to the counselee. Ellis's idea is that generally speaking, the consequences have a whole lot to do with the way the counselee has framed the first adversarial event that traumatized or negatively affected the counselee. So you see here the ABCs of Ellis's therapy, and that is first the adversary or the adversity. This is called by different names in different kinds of literature. Some psychotherapies call this the initial sensitizing event. Ellis calls it an adversity, an event that caused problems in the counselee's life. And then the counselee reacts in a certain way, behaves in a certain way. And that behavior is a result of the counselee's belief about the adversity, the way the counselee has framed the adversity, and then, of course, the consequences that come from all of that in the negative problems that have brought the counselee to see the counselor in the first place. So, in rational emotive therapy, or rational emotive behavior therapy as it's generally called today, the idea is to change the way you look at the adversity. That is, to change the way the counselee frames the adversarial event. And the whole issue here is reframing the way the counselee looks at that event. The way a counselee looks at an event may be a very ugly, gaudy, uh, dramatic, overly dramatized way. And consequently, Ellis says the way to do is to reframe the way the counselee looks at that to something that is not quite as audacious. So let's talk just a minute about your assignments for week 4. First, let's look at your reading assignments. I want you to read chapter 12 and 13 of Parrott's book, Counseling and Psychotherapy. Read them closely. Make sure to pay special attention to the detail of what's in each chapter. Secondly, I want you to read The Politics of Free Will by me. Actually, I wrote this article. It's an exposition of the difference between B.F. Skinner and Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and it particularly looks at the concept of free will from the standpoint of behaviorism and an existential theology. The third thing I want you to do is read an article called Conditioning and Learning. Watch then the interview conducted by Jeffrey Mishlove with Albert Ellis. I've provided URLs both here in this video and also in on Brightspace and in your syllabus. In other assignments this week, I want you to make sure you work hard on your discussion questions. These are the framework, the infrastructure for our online learning at Oklahoma Wesleyan. So be sure and take those questions seriously. Don't forget to read the minimum requirements. Also make sure you conclude every discussion question with a thoughtful, critical thinking question. Of course, then comes your paper. And you can choose either on behaviorism or rational emotive therapy. Write on one of those subjects. Write a summary. Write your opinion then. That's the second section of your paper. Your opinion of that particular therapy. And then your third section would be ideas that you can incorporate in your counseling. Of course, then you'll want to take your week 4 quiz.